Hello everyone, this is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful Rabbit Hole, Lore and Frey, and the upcoming Jaw the Dragon. Well, Doug Bowser of Nintendo has come out and confirmed it. The Nintendo Switch will continue to be supported for the next couple of years, destroying the narrative that Pretendos have been carefully constructing all year long. The Switch was about to be replaced and that the Switch 2 was imminent, right? Arlo was saying that like the Switch was dead. You have RGT making constant Nintendo Switch 2 videos. You have like shills, you have fake leakers, you have Twitter users, you have game journalists, you have industry analysts. Everyone was really trying very, very hard to downplay Nintendo Switch this year. And now that that's been debunked, now that we know that Switch is not going anywhere, we can safely say that Switch will easily outsell PS2 and become the best-selling console of all time, and that the Switch will continue to exist in the marketplace in some capacity for, at the very least, the next couple of years. Obviously, I do think we're about halfway through the console life cycle. Nintendo themselves have confirmed it, but it's not imminent like so many people have wanted to try to tell you. Right? Like the Switch will be replaced. Of course it will be. Hardware is always replaced by something new and interesting, but the Switch is nowhere near the end of its life cycle. The Switch 2 is not coming out this year or whatever these people were trying to say. So, now that with that in mind, now that we know this, now that this has been confirmed, now that we have like a better understanding of what's going on, now that people can no longer continue to make excuses, let's take a moment to like reflect on like why exactly this happened and what exactly is going on. As you know, the PS5 has been a complete disaster. Game journalists have been trying to sell you on these high profile games coming out on the console for years, and only it wasn't until recently that it managed to have some minor successes, right? You have, of course, like Elden Ring, you have Hogwarts Legacy, you have like Call of Duty, like GTA 6 is coming out soon, Resident Evil 4 remake is coming out in the next couple of weeks, Final Fantasy 16. Like this year seems to be like the equivalent of what 2015 was for the PS4, right? In which a bunch of high profile games came out and won over a bunch of normies, a bunch of casuals, a bunch of people who don't really play a ton of games. And it got some traction because of that. Witcher 3, games like Arkham Knight, games like Killzone, I think. Did the Order 1886 come out? There were a lot of like games that came out in that period that got like a little bit of traction for the PS4, right? And that kind of like paved the way for the console to move forward with this. They were able to pretend for a brief period of time that the PS4 was getting games, right? Until like the 2017 period was over, I would say people were saying that the PS4 was in its like at its absolute height, right? Until the Switch came out, people were calling the PS4 like the dominant platform on the market, which was laughable. But now we're seeing like the same kind of pattern repeat itself with the PS5 in that like we are seeing people hype up mediocre games like Resident Evil 4 remake, games like Final Fantasy 16, games like God of War Ragnarok, like uh, Horizon VR, PlayStation VR 2 has just come out actually. All these like mediocre PlayStation releases are getting a lot of hype and attention, and so the only way Sony knows how to deal with how to promote their own products is to downplay the competitions. So traditionally, what that amounts to is that Sony attacks plays Nintendo and Xbox essentially, especially Nintendo, but Xbox to a certain extent as well. And because the PS5 is supposed to be like the next generation of hardware, because it's more powerful, because it's more expensive, because like all these third parties are being paid by Sony to like support the console, the narrative right now is that the Switch can't support all these big third party games that are coming out on PS5. Although we've seen over the past couple of years that these games are games are still coming out on multiple platforms. A lot of the games that are coming out, like Gotham Knights and Forspoken, aren't all that good to begin with. Like the next generation of hardware is a complete joke. Essentially, there are no big AAA games anymore. Essentially, like I fully expect GTA 6 is really going to be like the last hurrah, the last stand of PlayStation in that regard. It's all they can really do is just wait for decade uh, these big like quadruple A games to come out and like kind of drive their console sales among casual audiences. because all casual audiences want to do is like drive around in like expensive cars and shoot cops in GTA. Like that's the entire PlayStation demographic. It always has been, right? But PlayStation traditionally has been able to like kind of trick their audience into thinking that their games are more sophisticated, they're more mature, they have a lot more going on than Nintendo. And because they have so much talent, because they have all these third-party developers, naturally, to the casual perspective, that means they have more variety, you have more options, that means you have like a lot more games to play, right? That is the impression they've always given. If you're not a Nintendo fan, if you don't know just how much better Nintendo is than all of the competition combined, yeah, naturally you would fall for this ruse. Naturally, you would think that like PlayStation was the dominant market leader in this regard and support them and not Nintendo. And I know a lot of people who have made this mistake, who have like invested a ton of time and money into buying PlayStation products, only to realize that like, wow, these games they're really not very good. And, I went through this process, like in the PS2 and PS3 years, where, like, I seriously thought that, like, yeah, I might get a lot of mileage out of a PS2. I love Nintendo games. I love video games. I had no problems, buying a different piece of hardware to try it and like experience it and have an idea of what it was like. And yeah, and like at first you do find a couple of games you enjoy. You do find things that aren't available on Nintendo platforms. You do find Kingdom Hearts. You do find Final Fantasy X. You do find like the God Hands, the Shadow of the Colossuses. You do find like stuff like that. But like when you like reflect on it, if you're like the sort of person who seriously goes back and like plays games that you grew up playing, or like really like consider what games are good and what games are bad, you'll realize very quickly that like the Nintendo games far outstrip their PlayStation equivalents in every way, shape, and form. Yeah, there are good PlayStation games to be sure, but hardly any of them match up to even like the average Nintendo releases. All right, like I just played a little bit of Skyrim today, and it really dawned on me how that game is just you walking around an empty field, leveling up whatever stats you're leveling up, right? Like, trying to like go on adventures, going through these repetitive dungeons, fighting these repetitive enemies with this repetitive combat, going through these quest lines that nobody remembers or cares about. Like that's Skyrim. Like when you compare it to like Breath of the Wild with its like huge open world with a lot of variety, with like, the ability to mountain climb and glide around the environment with just like stellar combat and mechanics and like crazy well thought out powers with a lot of utility and flexibility, like Skyrim simply can't compete. But casuals, normies, look at Skyrim and think it's like, oh yeah, it's like a playable Lord of the Rings, right? And like when they drop the game, when they get bored of it, they just kind of assume that like, well, it's not the game's fault, right? Like I am just not interested in putting all this time and effort into like doing every quest line or like exploring the entire map or doing anything. Like I played the game and I got like a good 20-30 hours out of it, or even like 5 or 10, and like I feel satisfied. Casual gamers are satisfied with just like experiencing something like Skyrim. And that is the issue we've been having over the past couple of years, is people who don't really think critically about games are being asked to evaluate games based on surface level criticisms, right? Like, if you just look at Skyrim and look at Kirby, like you would probably think Skyrim is the much more like well-made game, right? But in reality, Kirby has been going for 30 years longer. Like Kirby has like a long legacy of like high quality franchises. It's had like, it has a ton of variety. It's a lot of fun for what it is, and like excels at what it's trying to do. But like, the casual gamer, like the mature gamer, like would not appreciate that, right? Like even now, I think Kirby is heavily downplayed among the general audiences, even though the brand is like constantly growing in popularity, because like yeah, the games are well made, they are very fun. Like it's a situation that I don't think has any clear answers to how it's going to end, honestly. Like even now, I think people are looking forward to like GTA 6 and the new Call of Duty and like FIFA and like the annual sports titles, the series that just keep PlayStation propped up. I don't think anybody really understands just how bleak things are looking for PlayStation, and things really are looking bleak. Like they tried fabricating sales numbers in Japan, they were exposed almost immediately. They've been trying to like push like random projects, Forspoken, Final Fantasy 16. Those aren't going to do very well. Like we're seeing more and more that like PlayStation just can't compete with Nintendo at all. And so that's led to them like going to their go-to damage control establishment, like the board of people that they control, gaming journalists, right? They're using gaming journalists to try and push false narratives about Nintendo to try and convince you that you need to invest in a PS5 because the Switch is on the way out and the Switch 2 can't possibly live up to the Switch. That is the narrative they're trying to push right now, is that the Switch is on the way out because it simply can't compete with the PS5, but like the Switch 2 isn't going to be as unique or interesting as the Switch 1, right? Like they are desperately trying to force Nintendo to upgrade hardware at an awkward time for them, right? They are trying to force Nintendo into putting themselves in a bad position financially. So giving up on their highly successful, highly lucrative brand, the Nintendo Switch, in order to focus on something new when there's really no reason for them to do that. And uh, in doing so, they also managed to manipulate general audiences into thinking that like there's really nothing to look forward to on the Switch going forward, which is like laughable to think about. If you think about it, we don't even have like an original Mario Kart game yet. I think a lot of people just assume that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is the de facto Nintendo Switch Mario Kart game, but it's actually very possible that we might actually get Mario Kart 9 on the Switch. And if that happens, expect sales to explode, right? Like I think Mario Kart 9 could legit sell like 20 million Switches, right? Like the Mario Kart 9 would be a big deal. Like it's been a decade since the last Mario Kart game. Like I know a lot of people like think the DLC like is the replacement for Mario Kart 9, but or maybe they're holding off for the next console, but I don't know. I don't know if that's what they want to do. I legit thought like to myself the other day that Mario Kart 9 could come as early as next year. If you think about it, the DLC ends in the next couple of months or so this year, and the DLC is mostly, for the most part, just a bunch of tour tracks like ported over to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. They're not like really. There are original tracks. There are really good original tracks, but a lot of them are from tour specifically, and it really makes me think that like Mario Kart 9 could reuse a lot of these DLC tracks in a new engine with like new mechanics and stuff like that, with like some minor adjustments, and like while having like several new ones, right? Like I think Mario Kart 9 is already in production. Actually, I'm pretty certain that's been like confirmed, but or like yeah, of course they're always working on the next Mario Kart, but I do think like it's been long enough now. Like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has been like been so popular that I think that after the DLC concludes for Mario Kart 8, we may actually see some confirmation that it's coming on Nintendo Switch, and that's going to be like an even bigger blow against the narrative that Switch is on the way out because nobody was anticipating a new Mario Kart game on Switch, right? But that's what people don't realize. Like people like RGT85 are releasing statements like, "Oh man, Pikmin 4, it's gonna be the last game on Nintendo Switch." A couple of months ago, they were saying that like Pikmin 4 was too pretty to be on Nintendo Switch, but I digress. They were legit saying that like, "Oh, there's nothing coming after July." That's when they'll have another Nintendo Direct. That's when they'll talk about like the games coming at the end of the year and maybe like early next year, right? Like Fire Emblem Engage, I think we didn't hear about until like the September Direct last year. I think it kind of came out of nowhere. I'll have to like check. Fire Emblem Engage, like Nintendo does not announce games several years in advance anymore. In general, there are some minor exceptions like Metroid Prime 4, Tears of the Kingdom, but then that leads to like people, making conspiracy theories about those games, right? Like right now, you have a lot of people saying that like they delayed Zelda because they were scared of Elden Ring or because it was in development hell. When that isn't actually true at all. Like what I think is that Nintendo is very, 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 very well aware that there's always these constant narratives being pushed on the company, and that there are certain individuals trying to like manipulate the way that people view their games and their products. And so like every time that like some rumor pops its head up like, oh man, the Switch is about to be replaced. New Nintendo Direct drops. Oh, it'll be like early next year, like a new Nintendo Direct drops, like DLC. Like there are just so many things coming out in the foreseeable future. I don't understand how anyone could seriously argue that Nintendo Switch is dead unless you are a brain dead terminally online Muppet like Arlo, right? Like, if you actually look at the Nintendo Switch upcoming eShop releases, if you actually look at the games that are coming out that have been announced that have come out of nowhere, if you actually like really think about it for a split second, you would realize that like, wow, there is actually quite a lot to look forward to coming from Nintendo in the next couple of months. But no, like we are seeing like, damage control after damage control, like excuses after excuses, doing everything they possibly can to downplay the Switch. It's gotten so bad that like people like RGT, I hate bringing this back to him, but I he really is like the stereotypical example of like everything that's wrong with Nintendo YouTubers. Uh, People like that are seriously still pretending that the Steam Deck is a viable alternative to the Switch. Ignoring all the Nintendo exclusives, ignoring all the Switch's like, unique features, ignoring the more affordable price point, ignoring just how much more like successful the Switch has been in general. Like there is no denying that the Switch is infinitely more successful than the Steam Deck. Like stop, you need to stop pretending that like the Valve storefront is the Steam storefront is going to be able to carry like a mediocre piece of hardware like the Steam Deck. It's just never going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So, with that in mind, with that being said, what's next what's next for the Pretendos? What's next for the excuses? It remains to be seen. Right now, it feels like Pretendos have accepted that like Switch isn't going anywhere, and that it's still being supported, and that like Doug Bowser is telling the truth. So now they're like concern trolling about this. Now they think Switch is going to lose steam and like lose relevancy because of the competition. And what competition? Like what console is in Switch's niche that like dominates in the way that it does? Like there's nothing really remotely like it. Like it has its dedicated it has a dedicated player base and it's extremely popular. And not only that, like for the first generation ever, we have an online subscription service. So like people are going to continue like paying for Nintendo Switch games even if they're not actively buying new games regularly, right? Like never again will there be a period of like the Nintendo Switch collecting dust because people are still going to be paying for Nintendo Switch Online. They're not just going to like cancel their subscriptions or whatever because people don't cancel their subscriptions for anything typically. So that's what I that's my view on that is that like right now we saw the narrative collapse before our very eyes, right? In the past couple of months, we went from like Switch 2 is coming this year, and that the Switch is going to be dead after Tears of the Kingdom, to like concern trolling about the Switch being on the market too long. That's legit where we've been in the past couple of months, and I don't know if anyone else is paying attention to this, but it's shocking to see just how much these people will jump from narrative to narrative to conspiracy, desperately trying to push their nonsense that Nintendo is in trouble.